Hey chess fans, welcome back to part 2 of our discussion of Esserman's Ring of Fire. Let's get right to it. 1e4, c5, d4, c takes d4, c3, d takes c3, knight takes c3, e6, knight f3, a6, bishop c4, b5, bishop b3, bishop b7. Now, this is a very important position in the Morra. It has occurred quite frequently. Anybody who plays the Morra must be familiar with this logical set of development moves by black. Here we continue castles, and now the provocative b4. And if we recall the rules for whether you can sacrifice, these are rules of thumb. Of course, they're not. Nothing in chess can be absolutely concrete, and it'd probably be best to review these rules now in case you're seeing this series for the very first time. So you don't sack if there's a black pawn on d6. The sack is particularly potent if the knight is on c6. It's not in this position, but it's still good. The sack is more effective if the bishop is on b3, which it is here. This avoids tempo loss from a black knight landing on e5 or a5, and it unblocks the c file for the rook. Rule number 4, sack generally works best before black is castled, as is the case here. Preferably black should be at least 1 or 2 moves away from castling. Here he's 2 moves away from castling, so that's extra good for us. Rule 5, the sack may be particularly strong after an early b4 from black, and this is what has happened here. And the final rule, if black plays knight c6 to a5, consider sacking the bishop on d5. Okay, that doesn't apply to this position, but we have a number of conditions that do satisfy the requirements. Let's continue on. Knight d5. Before we get into the alternative defense, which is a 10 bishop to d6, let's look at some other options for black to decline the sacrifice. Esserman declares, and I believe him, that the knight absolutely must be taken. And we discussed some of the declined variations in part 1 of this video. One possibility we didn't look at was d6, and this is a logical try. This is a normal pawn structure in the Sicilian and the Morra. Just the simple knight takes b4 gives white an advantage in this position. But even stronger may be bishop to a4. And then, after, say, knight to d7, Esserman suggests taking on b4, but there may be a stronger line here. If you analyze a little bit further, bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, and now knight to b6, and we're forking a rook and queen. Houdini gives us a close to winning advantage in this position. Let's go back to the knight sacrifice. Another way of declining that we did discuss yesterday was knight to f6. We showed the line bishop to g5, but I wanted to alert you to another possibility in this line. It seems like white has several good moves here, and we can try rook e1. And now, as Esserman declares, it's impossible to take on d5 because of the very simple e takes d5, e takes d5, discovered check. He only has one move, or one sensible move, bishop, and then d6. And we're winning here. Let's go back. Rook e1. And now instead of e takes d5, he can try to play bishop to c5, putting the bishop on an active post. But now we have knight takes f6. The only hope for black to survive is if he takes with the g-pawn here. But if he takes with the more normal-looking queen to f6, then we get something like bishop to g5, queen to g6. Well, he could try queen takes b2 here, but this is horrible. After rook to e2, he must go to a3. Rook to c1, bishop retreats to b6, and then queen to d6, and we're simply winning here. We'll go back to this position where we've just played bishop to g5, and instead of taking on b2, he plays queen to g6, Now rook to c1, hitting the bishop, c5, and if he plays logical looking d6, it fails to rook takes c5 because he cannot take the rook because of checkmate, queen to d8 here. Instead of d6, after rook to c1, plays bishop to e7, bishop takes e7, king takes e7, rook takes c7, bishop to c6, and knight to e5. And we've got lots of threats in this position, and that's just simply winning. There's actually more theory in Esserman's book on all of these lines, which I again urge you to purchase if you're interested in the Morra from either side. But we want to make this video not too long. Hopefully these variations have convinced you that black simply cannot afford to not take the sacrifice. So after b4, knight to d5, he has to take. So he takes, e takes d5, and here we come to the crossroads that we met in the last video. In the previous video we discussed d6. Now d6 had the merit of allowing black's pieces on the queen side to develop relatively freely, but Esserman considers that the alternative, bishop to d6, is a better try for black. However, it does have the serious drawback of burying the black queen side, and that proves to be his undoing in many of these variations. This is one of these lines in the Morra where the computer will show an advantage for black, but if you follow Esserman's analysis with your computer on, you'll see that the evaluation gets continually revised upward in white's favor. And it's to Esserman's credit that he was able to find these lines. Let's look at the logical follow-up here to bishop to d6, which is rook to e1 check. And now there are two main crossroads here. We'll look first at king to f8. White's compensation here consists of black's stranded king and his lockdown queenside. Esserman cautions that white must play with great energy here to avoid being down a piece for nothing. The move here is queen to d4, and now knight to f6 is the most logical. Other moves are possible, and I'll refer you to the book to see all the other variations that could occur. You should be aware that the chapter that these lines occur in is called Into the Deep because of the tremendous complexity of the complications that arise in these lines. Okay, so knight to h4. Now we're winning. We're intending knight to f5. And now there's another crossroads here, so king to g8 is possible. Knight to f5 anyway. Bishop to f8. And now the spectacular looking bishop to h6. Black must play g6 here. If he tries g takes h6, then we have a couple of possibilities. We have two winning ideas. Queen to h4 is winning, and rook to e3. Rook to e3 is Esserman's move, and I'm sure it wins. My analysis indicates that queen to h4 may be stronger. You can see that there's an immediate disaster about to befall black on the g-file there after rook to e3. So after bishop to h6, he has to play g6. And now we have a couple of good moves. We can play bishop takes f8. Let's look at that. King takes f8. Rook to e7 is winning. After d6, he's going to be hard-pressed to defend on f7. Not to mention the fact that the knight on f6 is hanging. So let's go back. Another winning try for white is d6. G takes f5. Rook to e7. It's amazing how these sacrifices just keep coming from white. Black has a couple of possibilities here. Bishop takes e7. D takes e7. Queen takes e7. Queen to h4, and white has an unstoppable attack on the dark squares. Okay, after rook to e7, if he took on h6 instead, queen takes f6, and we'll be checkmating in a few moves. Okay, let's go back to the position after knight to h4. Besides king to g8, he also has the possibility of queen to c7. And now another spectacular move. Queen takes f6. And this is winning in all variations. G takes f6, of course. Bishop to h6, check. King to g8. Rook to e8. Bishop to f8. Rook to f8. It's checkmate. Okay, so we're going to continue with the position after bishop to d6, rook to e1 check. We just looked at king to f8. Let's look at knight to e7. We play knight to g5. Black castles into what he hopes is safety, but it's not too safe. Queen to h5, h6, knight to e4. And now we have two threats here. We have the threat of knight takes d6, of course, but also of another sacrifice, bishop takes h6. So let's assume he plays queen to e7 to defend the one threat. Bishop takes h6. He's got a couple of possibilities here. He can try the desperado. Bishop takes h2. It's basically his only move. King to h1. Queen to e5. Bishop to g5. And here white has serious threats. He's threatening knight to f6 check, winning the queen. So knight to d5. Knight takes d5 was played. This is an interesting position because this was actually all played before in the game Zelich-Cermak from 1995. In this position, Zelich dropped the ball and he played bishop takes d5. After queen takes d5, queen takes h2. Black was actually better and went on to win. Rather than bishop takes d5 in this position, Esserman found the much superior rook a to d1. And now we've got a threat of bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, knight to f6 check, winning the queen once again. So to guard against this, g6, queen takes h2, queen takes h2, king takes h2, knight to b6, now knight to d6, and white is winning in this position. He's got multiple threats. Knight takes b7, bishop to e7 winning the exchange, or even king to g3 intending bishop f6 and rook h1 followed by checkmate. Okay, so that was the position after bishop takes h2, the desperado. Let's look at his only other choice here, which is to take the bishop on h6. G takes h6, queen takes, and we have simple threat here. So black plays f6 to prevent this. And once again, there are a couple of ways to win here. You could play knight takes d6, queen takes d6, rook to takes e7, queen takes e7, and then d6 with a discovered check, winning the queen. Okay, so black has just played f6 to prevent the threatened knight to g5. We looked at one of white's ways to win here, which was knight takes d6. But the other way to win is Esserman's knight to g5 anyway. F takes g5, of course. And now rook takes e7, bishop takes e7, d6 discovered check, rook to f7, queen to g6 check, king to h8. We could be winning the queen, but after bishop takes f7, we've got a mate in 3. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this discussion of the Esserman Ring of Fire. And the next video will examine another d5 sacrifice in the Morra Gambit. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.